Jack Dempsey is the angry hobo who could.
In the case we have here, Jack Dempsey is a very, very vicious man. And as you see, he fights like someone hasn't eaten for 5 days. Oh man, I'm crazy about Jack Dempsey because of his ferocious intensity. There's no one like him.
As a teen, Jack, without sin, leaves his large Mormon family with a small inheritance to chase a dream of becoming a champion. Before long, what little he had was gone. With a rumble in his stomach and no place to go, Jack chased migrant work as much as his dream. He once said, "You could have hit me in the chin with a hammer for $5. If you haven't eaten in days, you understand." It didn't matter if it was a mining camp, a bar, or a boxcar. Jack Dempsey fought anytime, anywhere, often for just enough to eat, just enough to keep a dream afloat between jobs.
And then when he got to the next town, he'd look for a place that had a close fight going on, and he would fight, get his money, and then be able to get a room for the night and food, and then go on to the next.
Jack Dempsey was a desperate man, and a desperate man is a dangerous thing. When his stomach wasn't growling, Jack grew into a different animal. 6 foot 1 inch, 190 pounds of simmering rage. Each fight, he made a little more money and got a little closer to his goal. Until Jack makes his first legendary appearance on film in his title shot against the Potawatomi giant Jess Willard. Jess was 6 foot 6 inches and weighed 245 pounds. He won the heavyweight title off an aging, politically exiled Jack Johnson in Havana, Cuba.
Temperature at ringside, 103 degrees and rising. This is the first time film was taken from first row ringside.
It took a mere 26 rounds of a fight scheduled to go 45.
Johnson goes down.
Jess was a huge, strong, powerful man with near infinite stamina. Took up boxing in his late 20s to make some money and found it easy given his massive dimensions. The day was July 4th, 1919. 19,500 people gathered under a brutal Toledo sun. All of those people owned the same hats. All of those people were about to watch boxing change in front of their eyes.
So the big fight begins, and Big Jess moves easily into action.
The simple fact is Jess Willard was a head taller and had 10 inches of reach, but strength and stamina tell over time. Jack Dempsey decided he had to get the giant gone quickly. Within a minute of his first appearance on film, he creates his signature move, the Dempsey double shift. Every punch Jack threw was thrown for power.
His left whipped in tirelessly and often. The blows miss or graze Willard. Dempsey hasn't the range yet.
By dropping his weight and stepping in with each foot as he punched, he keeps Willard on defense as he closes the gap.
What else can he do against the endlessly moving little man? But when try as he will, it's far beyond Big Jess. For all the charging, for all the blows.
Crossing the beach minefield and getting close enough to drop Jess for the first time. The remains of the round is the filthiest beating in boxing. Jess Willard looked like a baby deer learning to walk in a ring with a wolverine. Made all the worse by the fact that Jack was under no obligation to move to a neutral corner after a knockdown. So Jack Dempsey stood there, daring the big man to rise as he stepped around the referee to get to Willard's back. Any predator knows the best place to attack is from behind.
The instant Willard leader up and board back at him again. Jess is wide open. He has absolutely no defense. And he hits the leg again. Curry's up.
It was a round in the genre of horror. Jess Willard was knocked down 7 times, and because he was a champion, he got up 8.
right smashes into his side. Other right cracks to the head, and Willard collapses into a sitting position, dazed and
The crowd was in a frenzy, drowning out the bell to end the round. Dempsey thought the fight was stopped and left the ring. The ref and corner had to hurry him back in. Willard was able to stay upright for another horror show, with an increasingly unrecognizable Jess Willard playing victim.
Keeps that tiger away from him. With all his weary, broken body, Jess does his best to keep going. Why? It's no use. He hasn't a chance. He has to fight, even when he has nothing left to fight with. He can't get away from that tiger who's stalking. His arms and legs are heavy with exhaustion. Salt sweat burns the guy to get his KO before the bell rings. He'll have to do it in a hurry. But Willard's only thought is to protect himself. Weak and tired as he is, it's no sense to get him set for the finish.
His champion's heart called him out for a third round. Willard's face became a mask of blood and bruise that began leaking down his leg.
A new champion being born here, born in the torrid heat among the yells of 70,000 spectators has gone down, but for the heart of a lion and the endurance of a buffalo. He gets more of it. Why doesn't the referee stop it? Why? But Ollie McCord comes from the old school. There's only one way for a champion to finish this age, and that's on his back. And the impossible has happened again. Big Jeff has lasted to this another murderous round with this roaring Dempsy.
Jess understandably couldn't come out for the fourth. He was beaten, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. He got up to congratulate the man who tried to slaughter him. As the adrenaline of the mauling wears off, Jess Willard is left alone in a crowd of 19,000. The biggest man of them all felt small as a field mouse. He sat and reevaluated his entire life. Big Jess Willard began to cry. Through a mixture of blood and tears, Jess Willard was repeatedly choking out the words that this would be his retirement. I have $100,000 and a farm in Kansas. Jess Willard went back to that farm in Kansas and mostly stayed there. Jack Dempsey took boxing from barely legal to the biggest sport in the U.S. Jack drew the first $1 million gate in boxing against Georges Carpentier. The best boxer in French history was also a fighter pilot of some renown. In over 110 fights, he had nearly 90 victories and was reigning light heavyweight champion. But he was simply not a heavyweight.
The first $1 million gate in boxing history. At Boyle's 30 Acres, Jersey City, New Jersey, July 2nd, 1921. Scheduled. Production camps and saloons that he first gained the opportunity to display his prowess with his fists. He was rated as just a rough, tough kid. But here he is, the champion of the world. Carpentier's face is pretty well battered now.
Dempsey blew him away in 4 rounds. It was the first fight ever broadcast over the radio, and the first title fight sanctioned by a major commission that still remains today.
9, he's up just in time. And Dempsey goes after him and down again. And Jack Dempsey remains heavyweight champion of the world.
The next year, Jack got in the ring with another giant. Luis Angel Firpo was a big man and big puncher, nicknamed the Wild Bull of the Pampas.
Dempsey doesn't wait to start swinging. He's in there to make it short.
Firpo looked tailor-made for Dempsey to put his favorite game plan to work.
Dempsey's speed is too much for him. Here goes down again.
Dempsey got in his matador mindset, even if he had made it look easy. But it's easy to forget that giant slaying is dangerous work.
Careful down the fourth. But he won't stay down. Careful like a wild bull, raised by pain.
It's arguably the wildest round in boxing history. When Jack Dempsey is driven through the ropes by Firpo, Jack claws his way back through the ropes, and the war is back on. It was reckless violence, and it was incredible. Jack comes out in the second and butchers the wild bull.
Two men fought almost like wild animals in one of the most amazing fights that man has ever seen.
Jack would finally meet his match in the Fighting Marine, Gene Tunney. Nearly 130,000 people, a record which stood for nearly 67 years.
Gene, 130,000 fans here tonight. The largest gate in the history of American sports.
What Jack had in ferocity, Gene Tunney had in game planning.
While he doesn't have Dempsey's power, Gene can hurt you plenty.
The best way to beat Jack Dempsey was simply to not exchange with him. Gene jabbed and moved, clinched and peppered. He certainly outboxed Dempsey because he understood there was no outfighting him. Sometimes the only winning move is not to play. In an unusually short 10-round fight, Gene soundly decisioned Dempsey.
No hard feelings on Dempsey's part. He congratulates Gene Tunney, the new heavyweight champion of the world.
A rematch was held in Soldier Field in Chicago. Another 100,000 strong showed up to see a man who was still very much the same angry hobo he was a decade earlier.
Over 100,000 fans here in Soldiers Field tonight.
He fought the same insistent weaving style, but Tunney had him figured out. A puncher like Jack is always dangerous, but the game had changed around him. When he leveled Gene with a combo, he hovered over him like he did with every other opponent. Only before the fight was a rule made about going to a neutral corner. Jack did what he always did, which gave Gene precious seconds to recover. Supposedly, Gene was on the ground for a count of 14 seconds, but rose.
Tunney is up. Tunney trying to stay away from Dempsey, trying to last out the round.
Gene would go on to get the decision. Jack laid down his gloves after a fight forever known as the long count fight. When Jack Dempsey retired, he was one of the most famous men in the country. He was secure enough to turn down a trilogy with Tunney and the payday that might have come with it. Jack didn't languish in his retirement. Jack Dempsey wrote the single most influential book of boxing technique of the modern era. He didn't even get out of shape. He didn't even stop getting into fights. There's a video of him in his mid-40s, mauling a pro wrestler who decided to call him out. Even when him and Jess Willard met for a friendly media piece, Jack just couldn't help but throw PTSD triggering punches. There's stories of him deep into his 70s laying out a pair of New York muggers. Boxing is an expression of the beast in us. Even as an old man, the beast never left Jack Dempsey.